Most string players practice intonation wrong. Hi, I'm Wilhelm Magner, viola professor at UT Austin, and in the last 10 years I've asked many colleagues and friends their best advice on how to fix intonation. Let's start with the basics. My first viola teacher, André Roy, used to ask all his students, "What's your main instrument?" And we would say viola, and he would say, "Wrong. Your first instrument is your ear." And this is what I learned. 90 to 95% of intonation is actually in the ear. Which leads me to my next point, pre-hearing. You have to have a very clear image of the pitch in your head before you play. If your mental image is not very strong or not very clear, you will never ever be able to play in tune. If you don't have a clear image, it's like shooting darts in the dark. You shoot, you open the light, I guess it was bad, but you don't know how much you've missed by. So, you always want to have a very clear mental image, aim, shoot, and then see where you're at. Another great way to develop your inner ear is to sing. You want to try to sing the passage, play it on the piano, sing it, and see how close your ear and your voice is actually to the real pitch. Joining a choir can also really help in developing your ear, especially if it's a good choir. Which leads me to the most common advice we all receive about playing in tune, which is to practice slowly. But I have to say that for me this advice always felt incomplete. Practicing slowly in itself is not enough. You have to also listen incredibly carefully. Think about it this way. If you practice slowly but you're not listening, you're going to get the same bad result, but in twice the time. And this also brings me to another interesting point regarding intonation, and that is whether we adjust or not. Heifetz used to say that he doesn't play more in tune than everybody else, he just adjusts faster. But when I practiced adjusting, and I'll show you later in the video a very good technique for that, I found that sometimes I would end up playing very wishy-washy. So I found that there are two real ways to approach practicing intonation in regards to adjusting. The first one is to practice the finger falls on the string, and if it's bad it adjusts, and hopefully very quickly. The second one is to also train your fingers to fall directly in the right place. I will show you a technique later in the video for both of these things. You need to train both so that you can actually play really in tune. Speaking of adjusting, one of the best tips I ever got on intonation is actually to really take time on the out of tune notes to notice whether they are sharp or flat. Too many times you will see people who practice this way. When they play a note out of tune, they take their hand off the instrument as if they touched a very hot stove. It looks something like this. They never really take the time to ask themselves, was it sharp or was it flat? They just go, oh, it was out of tune. But that's not enough. If you do not know if it was sharp or flat, there is no way you will be able to adjust it. So here's what I recommend. I call it the Zen technique. You pick a section that you're going to play, and you play from beginning to the end. No stopping, even if you play something that's deeply out of tune. It can be a 4-bar section, let's say. Then you go back and you try to remember which pitches were sharp, which pitches were flat, and then you repeat. If you cannot play and listen very well at the same time, recording yourself will really help. I highly recommend recording yourself in this process. You should record, write down every single spot out of tune with little arrows like Dorothy, the legendary violin pedagogue, used to do. Is it sharp? Is it flat? Then you go for each note that's out of tune and you try to play it 3 times in a row correctly, slowly. Then you repeat. That way you will really improve your intonation. Now, you might say, okay Wilhelm, this is all great, but I wish I had a system, a method where I can take a passage, put it through an exercise, and it comes out on the other end perfectly in tune. And you're in luck because I've got the perfect exercise for you. This exercise was shown to me by Jonathan Barrick, who learned it directly from Dorothy Delay herself. And it's called the magic note. So here's how it works. We take a 4 to 8 bar passage and we strip it of all its rhythm. We only play each pitch, one after the other, in quarter notes, whole bow, 40 beats per minute, one click you play, one click you prepare and you pre-hear. Once you start playing, you have to adjust to the mental image of the pitch. If you cannot find the note by the end of the click, you have to go back one. Here's how it looks. The second step of this exercise is to repeat this without any of the breaks, but still the same in the bow, the same in the left hand, and still adjusting. Let's see how it looks. The third step of this process, and the final step before we bring it back to normal, is to play the passage in rhythm, still without vibrato, at the same 40 BPM we just did it at. Once you can do it at 40 beats per minute, you can speed it up by chunks of 20. So do the whole exercise, step 1 to 3, at 60 beats per minute, 80, 100, until you reach the tempo that you need to play the piece. You can then add some light vibrato. This exercise is incredibly powerful in fixing your intonation because it starts by setting very clear pitch footprints in your mind. And then, as you speed up and have to run faster, you can follow the footprints that you already built in your brain. You also do it in a very relaxed physical way, which contributes to the overall relaxation of the passage. Another of the most powerful practice tips for intonation I know is to practice connections. Oftentimes, intonation is not only an issue of putting fingers right in the right place, but sometimes it's also of connecting two hard double stops or notes together. So one of the most useful ways to practice this is to slur them pam, param, param by repeating the note and slurring it to the next one. It looks something like this. Let's say I'm going to take the 6th of Walton Concerto as an example. So, by connecting them, pam, param, 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 I really work on connecting every single one of the combination of notes. And that really helps smooth out the passage when I play it for real. Sometimes practicing intonation can get very frustrating. And here comes into play another great piece of wisdom that I got from Nathan Cole, the Boston Symphony concertmaster. So it goes like this. Great artists succeed 100 times every time they practice. What does that mean? That means that we have to set goals in our practice that are realistic. You need short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. A long-term goal might be, I have to play this piece really in tune for my lesson next week. A medium-term goal might be, I want to get better at intonation on this page today. But a short-term goal, and those are the ones I focus on the most day to day when I practice, could be something like, can I play these 2 notes in tune? Sometimes, if the whole phrase feels a bit overwhelming and frustrating, break it down further. Following the Pareto principle, you want to be succeeding around 80% of the time when you're practicing. So you have to break down the hard passages into chunks where you can succeed around 80% of the time. One of the great ways to do that is to ask yourself, well, if I can't play the entire passage, can I play just the first 2 notes in tune? And if you can, do it a few times in a row. Celebrate it. Can I play the first 2 notes of the Walton Concerto in tune? Not quite. Much better. That's a bit flat. Great. Wonderful. I'm so good. See, when I practice like this, it's a positive thing. It is not, and I reiterate this, it is not a negative process. It is a very zen process. We talked before about the idea of not reacting like you touch the stove when you play something out of tune. Let me now dig into why that is. There are 2 kinds of systems in your body when you play the violin or the viola. A muscular system and a nervous system. When you touch a stove, you take your hand out very fast. That is reflexes. The signal goes from your hand to the top of your spine and back. It doesn't go to the brain. And so, if it went to the brain, it would be too slow. So to be faster, it goes to the top of the spine, I forget what that's called in English, and moelle épinière in French, and goes back to the hand. That kind of nervous reactions don't go to the brain, and so the brain doesn't actually learn anything. The same thing goes for practicing. If you have a knee-jerk reaction when you play something out of tune, your brain will never learn. You're much better to play the note out of tune, sit on it, go, oh, it was a bit flat. Okay, next time I'm going to try again. And most importantly, do not introduce interruptions in your playing. What I mean by that? If you play something and every time you hit a note out of tune, you interrupt yourself like a panic, your body will never learn. This is tension. Your body does not like tension. Much better to play the passage, even if it's out of tune, fine, stay calm. Strategize. You will make a better plan. You will break it down. Do not have a touch the stove reaction. Let's now move on to double stops, which for many people are some of the hardest things to tune on a string instrument. Few ideas for double stops. Don't press too hard with the left hand. That's the main thing. Don't squeeze with the thumb. Don't press too hard. Try to have the same amount of pressure and facility that you have on one finger on 2 fingers. Now, the most useful piece of advice I ever received in regards to tuning double stops came from Jonathan Barrick. It went something like this. When you play double stops, you always want to be adjusting the lowered number finger. So let's say I play a third. 3, 1. What's the lowest number finger? 1. So I'm going to put the 3 perfectly in tune. I have to practice that. And then adjust the 1 until it rings. Fantastic. In this case, that ends up being the top voice that we're adjusting. Now, let's take a sixth. So if I take a sixth, 1, 2. What's the lower number finger? 1. So now I adjust the 1. Notice how I'm adjusting now the lower voice. It doesn't matter which voice it is. What matters is adjusting the lower number finger. If you adjust both fingers at once, it's like one leg goes this way, one leg goes this way, and there is no center of pitch. So, the only exception to that rule are 1/3 octaves and tritones, where you want to adjust the higher number finger. But everything else, you always adjust the lower number finger. The lower number finger is also stronger because let's say you play an octave. Much easier to adjust the first finger than the 4. The 1 is always stronger. So this is the best piece of advice I ever received in regards to tuning double stops. The slur method, pam, param, param, that we did before also really helps to help connect double stops and have them be in tune. And remember, you can always adjust them. Another great piece of advice for double stops has to do with practicing the voices independently. That is a great way to diagnose if there is any issues. Most of the time, the lower voice is the one that we tend to avoid. So please, once try, play each voice separately by putting both fingers on the string, but only playing one of the strings. I might make a full video on double stops if that's something that you guys are interested in. One of the most common causes of bad intonation, besides issues in the ear, are actually issues of tension. If you have any extra tension in your shoulder, elbow, wrist, fingers, anywhere, neck, everything about playing the violin or the viola or the cello or the bass will be harder. Even if you practice great intonation, if you get tense when you play, it will very rarely come out consistently. Remember, intonation is all about percentages. You want to increase your average accuracy. One of the best ways to be consistent in that is actually to be relaxed. Another reason for that is the brain actually hates tension. The body hates tension. The brain will not want to learn anything to do with tension. So if you try to teach it something that feels not right, that is tense, the body will not remember it, which is why you can repeat it something 50 times and it's still not going to stick. So trying to play everything in a relaxed way is a very, very useful strategy. Sometimes I get students who struggle with intonation, and when I ask them how much time of their day or of their practice, percentage-wise, are they spending on intonation, they say, "Oh, Wilhelm, you know, I'm spending a lot of time, like 50% of the time." And I go, "No, you are wrong. When I wanted to fix my intonation, I had to spend 99% of my time on intonation." And the great Henrik Schering, the violinist, even said at the end of his life that even though he has all these musical considerations, philosophical considerations, most of his time is still spent measuring half steps and whole steps. And so, if you are not playing in tune and not spending 70–80% of your time on intonation, that just means that you should spend more of your practice on intonation, listening very carefully, recording yourself, etc. One of the biggest limiting beliefs I had in terms of intonation practicing was the idea that I was afraid of making mistakes in my practice. I learned at some point that when you make mistakes, the brain remembers them and learns them, and you don't want to teach your brain the wrong way to do things. This is all really true. However, you still want to make mistakes and then notice what they are to then be able to fix them. Here's how this looks in practice. Instead of being scared of making mistakes, pick a small section, play it through, do not stop until the end of the section, and then take notice of the notes that are out of tune. Okay, now I say, okay, for me, the F sharp was a bit flat, so now I will do it again, but notice how I didn't panic. I stay very calm. Let me do it again and try to put the F sharp a bit sharper. Okay, the last E was a bit flat for me, and then the sound was not as great on the G. Let me try again. Okay, the first E was not quite the sound that I wanted. Pretty good. Can I repeat it now? See, that's how I would practice. Very focused, very calm, always trying to compare what I'm doing to the mental image that I have. This is one of the best ways to practice. Another one of the mistakes I see people doing when they practice intonation is to never practice fast. They only practice so slow. But then when they have to play something fast, actually everything falls apart. Here's how to fix that. Instead of practicing very slow and then slowly building it up, keep in mind that when you do things faster, the muscular necessities of the passage will be different. Different muscles will have to be used. So, what I'd rather do is practice very slowly to set the pitches, then go practice, try it a few times, very fast, real tempo or 80% tempo, and see how physically it feels. You can also practice fast, but very small chunks. Let's say I practice Paganini Moto Perpetuo. Of course I could practice like this. But that really doesn't help if I have to play fast. So what I could instead do is to do like this. Okay, the last F was flat. A bit sharp. Good. Good. The E was a bit sharp. Nice. The last C was a bit sharp. Etc. You can also group by 4, by 6, overlap the groupings. The whole idea is to give your brain time to process what's going on, to listen for intonation, but also to understand how physically it feels to play fast. You can then chain a lot of fast things together to make a longer section. Finally, let me touch briefly on the idea of the different kinds of intonation. The two main ones I'm going to address today are harmonic intonation and melodic intonation. Pythagorean intonation is something for the smart people. I don't understand how exactly it works, or I'm not exactly sure how to explain it. But melodic intonation and harmonic intonation, I think I can explain. So, here's how it goes. Let's take a simple example. If I play open G and E natural first finger, and I try to make it ring as much as possible. Okay, rings. Now let me play the same E with open string. You see how terribly out of tune it is? That's why we need different kinds of tuning. So, if I play something in a string quartet, or that's more harmonic based, like Bach, I would try to see what the chord is and try to adjust the thirds, in general minor thirds a bit higher and major thirds a bit lower, to create more resonance. Minor, and let me see now major. So, if I look at this F sharp, let's say in this major chord, it really rings with the A. But if I were to play a scale, that sounds flat. If you play something more melodic, then you can put this F sharp a bit higher, more leading. If I put the same leading F sharp with open A, it sounds out of tune. So actually, every note is not absolute like the piano. But on a string instrument, you can actually play around with it quite a bit. F sharp could be here, could also be here. It depends. Anyway, these are a lot of intonation tips for you. I hope they are helpful. By the way, if you practice this and you find that you still have trouble releasing tension when you play violin or viola, you should check out my video on tension release over here. Thank you very much for watching and have an excellent rest of your day.